Life in Vietnam 40 years ago. A look back at the 1980s. The 1980s was a transformative yet challenging decade for Vietnam. Emerging from years of war, the country faced numerous difficulties in rebuilding its economy and society. Life for the Vietnamese people during this period was marked by hardship, but also by resilience, resourcefulness, and an unwavering sense of community. This video explores various aspects of daily life in Vietnam 40 years ago, including the economic conditions, living standards, food culture, education, healthcare, and social values, providing a comprehensive view of how ordinary people lived during this era. Firstly, economic challenges and daily life. In the 1980s, Vietnam operated under a centrally planned economy, heavily influenced by socialist principles. The government controlled the production and distribution of goods, and private ownership was discouraged. The economy struggled to recover from the devastation of war, and the international trade was limited due to the United States-led embargo and strained relations with other countries. Next up is rationing system. To manage the scarcity of resources, the government implemented a rationing system where essential goods like rice, sugar, cooking oil, and fabric were distributed using coupons, known as tem. However, the supply of these items was often inconsistent, and families had to queue for hours to obtain their allotted portions. Many households relied on black markets to acquire necessities, which were sold at significantly higher prices. Let's move on to employment and income. Most people in rural areas worked in agriculture, cultivating rice, vegetables, or other crops as part of cooperative farming systems. In cities, individuals worked in state-owned factories, government offices, or small workshops. Salaries were modest, and in many cases, workers received additional compensation in the form of food or goods rather than cash. Families often supplemented their income through side jobs like trading or small-scale farming.
Housing was basic and often overcrowded. In rural areas, homes were typically made of bamboo, wood, or bricks, with thatched roofs or corrugated metal sheets. Urban housing consisted of apartment blocks that were small and lacked modern amenities. Shared bedrooms and kitchens were common in urban living spaces. Despite these limitations, homes were filled with warmth and community spirit, as families often lived together across multiple generations. Transportation in Vietnam during the 1980s was limited and underdeveloped. For most people, bicycles was the primary mode of transport. Owning a motorbike was considered a luxury, and only wealthier families or state officials could afford one. Public transportation, such as buses, was scarce and unreliable, often overcrowded and uncomfortable. Roads in rural areas were unpaved and prone to flooding during the rainy season, making travel difficult. In cities, traffic was less chaotic than it is today, but the lack of infrastructure meant commuting was still challenging. Long-distance travel between provinces was typically done by train or bus, but this mode of transport was slow and the conditions were far from ideal. Education and literacy. Education was a priority for the government as it sought to rebuild the country by fostering a literate and skilled population. However, the education system faced significant changes due to a lack of resources and infrastructure. Access to schools. Schools, particularly in rural areas, were often small and poorly equipped. Classrooms were overcrowded, with children sitting on wooden benches and sharing textbooks. Many students had to walk long distance to attend school, and some dropped out to help their families with farming or household chores. Teaching materials, books, paper, and pens were scarce, so students often used slate and chalk for writing. Teachers relied on traditional blackboards and oral instruction, and creativity was essential in overcoming resource constraints. Despite these difficulties, education was valued highly, and many parents made sacrifices to ensure their children could attend school. Literacy campaigns. The government implemented nationwide campaigns to eradicate illiteracy, especially in remote and rural areas. Volunteers and young teachers were sent to teach basic reading and writing skills to adults and children who had missed formal schooling during the war.
Community spirit and social values. Despite the hardships, Vietnamese society in the 1980s was characterized by a strong sense of community and collective responsibility. Neighborhood bonds. In both rural and urban areas, neighbors supported one another in daily life. People shared food, tools, and labor, fostering a sense of solidarity. Communal activities like building houses, harvesting crops, or organizing local festivals brought people together and strengthened social bonds. Family values. Family played a central role in Vietnamese society. Multi-generational households were common, with grandparents, parents, and children living under one roof. Elders were respected and often played a significant role in decision-making and childcare. Resilience and optimism. Despite the economic and social challenges, people remained optimistic about the future. The shared struggles of the post-war period created a sense of unity and determination to build a better life for the next generation. In conclusion, life in Vietnam 40 years ago was defined by hardship, simplicity, and resourcefulness. While people faced numerous challenges in terms of economic stability, living standards, and access to basic services, they found strength in their resilience, creativity, and communal spirit. The experiences of this era laid the groundwork for the significant transformations that followed, particularly with the introductions of economic reforms in 1986. Today, as Vietnam continues to develop and modernize, the lessons of perseverance and solidarity from the 1980s remain an integral part of the nation's identity.